this is not a Java only channel by any means. This is a CockroachDB channel. So I was wanting to talk about all kinds of technology stacks. And so I was sitting there wondering about some other things like .NET, Python, and whatnot. And lo and behold, my good teammate here, Mr. Felipe Gutierrez, was like, "Well, let me at it. I got some stuff for you." And I was like, "Well, let's turn the stage over to you, Monsieur. Let's see what you've got to share with us about the Cockroach DB."
Hey Greg, guys, welcome to this episode where we are going to experiment with .NET, right? So, yes, as Greg already pointed out, practically we are a database company, CockroachDB, so we should be able to do a lot of stuff with different programming languages. So right now, today is the turn of .NET, and we're going to talk about it. We are going to actually create a small web application. We're going to use our famous payroll applications, just very simple for the newbies, for the people who wants to actually know how to connect to CockroachDB using this particular framework. And in this case, we are going to use this using a Mac. And of course, if you have a Windows machine, you are actually the same command lines that we're going to use practically are, it's going to be the same if you want to create this application and connect to CockroachDB. So let me start sharing my screen so we can start right away. So let me see. Very good. We have this here. Nice. So I already split this, but on your left, we have our GitHub account. We have the Select Star Show. So you are welcome to actually, get all these repositories that we've been, cooking up for you. And practically the new one is the C# payroll example. That's the one that we are going to do today. So I'm going to show you step by step what do you need to do in order to connect your .NET application. So we're going to do the payroll example in this case. All right. So on your right, actually we have the command line. I'm going to try to put like the whole thing there. And one of the things that we're going to start with will be I'm already on a folder. The name is Workspaces. So I'm going to create the payroll directory. So as you can see, we have that payroll, nothing there. So what we're going to do is, first of all, something, of course, that you require in order to do a .NET application on the Mac or your Windows, of course. You need to have installed the SDK. So for the SDK, if you go and do Google like SDK.NET install, practically is going to take you to all the methods that you can have in order to install in your system the .NET framework, your SDK. So in this case, right now I'm using the .NET. Let me see the .NET version. The .NET version that I'm going to use today for this podcast is 90203. So that's how we are going to start. So I've been hearing, a lot of students, customers, clients that say, hey, sometimes you're doing in different ways. What is the best approach in order to do this kind of or architect this kind of application? So I'm going to show you something that in this case will be, you can say like today will be the first part or part one of the .NET, because we are going to use the ORM, the Object Relational Mapping, using the EF core, the entity framework from .NET, right? So on the next episode, on the next, in the future, we are going to do the ADO.NET. But today we're going to use EF core, is the entity framework, and see how easy it is to connect. So for that, we are going to create a particular solution. So for the solution, what I have right now is some kind of a keystrokes. So this is what you need to do in order to create just a solution. So I'm going to create a solution named payroll. So practically will be like that, right? And as you can see, you already have that payroll. We have kind of a duplicate there, but we can go there. And if you see, I have only my solution file. So inside the solution file, what I'm going to do is practically do the .NET, because we're going to do a new a web application. What I'm going to do is I'm going to create several projects right now, even without start adding all these codes. So I'm going to use these particular naming conventions, something that I've been seeing on the .NET apps. Normally, you start with capital letters. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to create this particular project name, Payroll Web API, and then I'm going to add it to my solution. So this is the first one. That's where this web API is going to have our controllers, is going to have our main program that is going to run. And we're going to see how we can actually use even libraries in order to actually have a better, I can say, system in order to even extend it at some point, right? So I'm going to do that. Practically, we have the web API there. Then what I'm going to do is I'm going to add that web API to my solution. In order to do that solution, normally you do like this particular command where it says, hey, please, .NET solution, add the payroll web API to your project, right? So what I'm going to do next, I'm going to do the same thing. Now, take a look, first of all, before we did, actually it's right here, where it says, hey, I'm going to do a web API, new web, right? So there's a lot of templates there with the .NET. So with the .NET, what I'm going to do now is I'm going to do a library. So in this library, what I'm going to do is I'm going to put my domain. I can put domain, I can put models if you want, but here in the library, I'm going to have my repository and I'm going to have my models. In this case, the employee, the one that we are being, doing over several episodes now. So that's one of the things that I need to do. And then, of course, I need to add it to my solution. Again, it's kind of a, if you repeat this over and over, practically you're getting used to use the .NET. Of course, you probably, the guys who are already an experienced developers on the .NET area, probably you're going to say, well, it's an easier way to do that with the UI, right? Yes, of course, if you're using Visual Studio or VS Code, they already have these kind of scenarios, but I like to do a command line. So this is another approach. You can take it like that, right? So now that we're adding this particular class, we can add that to our project. Now, and the next part, I'm going to add a new library, and this library is going to have practically, I'm going to do everything at the same time, right? This one, as you can see, is payroll.data.ef in order to say, hey, I'm going to put all my implementation there of the repository that I'm going to create. So here is where the actual access to the database is going to live. So that's how we're going to create this particular class live. And of course, I'm going to add it to my project, right? So I have that as well. All right. So if we actually take a look into our structure, we're going to see the three projects and the solution file. So in order to actually open it, I'm going to use Writer from JetBrains. You can use VS Code. You can use, if you're on Windows, of course, you can use, let me move this. You can use on Windows Visual Studio, right? So we have all this. We already have everything here, and automatically it's going to detect everything that we need, right? At some point, I'm going to need some assistance on the terminal, of course. And take a look. On your left, you have the data EF, the library, and the web application. So let's dig into each one of these and see what else we can do. I'm going to try to minimize this so we can only focus on what I'm going to show you next. So the first thing we're going to go is going to go into the library. So my library, as you can see, it already has that particular class, but we can rename it. Let's do a rename over here. Let me see. Refactor this. I'm going to rename it Shift F6 So I'm going to say employee, our famous class that we've been doing with Java, with Go. So that's how kind of we're doing these things. So practically, I already have again my templates, so it's easy for me not to forget and just focus only on this class. So let's take a look into this. So practically, we have my employee class, and as you can see, this is a C#, of course, language, and allows me to do these kind of a setters and getters for my fields. And in this case, remember that we've been doing global unique IDs. So that's why I'm saying like my ID is going to be global unique ID. My name and role are going to be a string. And by default, I'm going to give you a new ID. And practically, these guys are going to be empty, right? So this is my model, right? So the next thing I'm going to do, now that I have my model, now I want to remember that's something that we're going to do. So this part, we are going to do the entity framework. In the next release of the .NET, we're going to do ADO.NET. So for that, something that I like to do is actually, kind of create a way to do a particular interface that allows me to have just a contract that we are going to use into different ways to access data, right? So for that, I'm going to do an interface, and this interface, I'm going to call this iRepository. So this is something that kind of the naming convention, you need to start with an I on the interface, right? So I'm going to put the iRepositories very similar, or I'm trying to emulate the same practice that normally in frameworks like Spring Boot allows you to do, right? So this kind of stuff. So I already have the code, of course, and I'm going to review that with you guys. So in order to do this, I have already the repository. I need to import some of the things. Something that I like too much is like I used to have like the namespace all the way enclose the whole class or the whole interface. Now with these new versions, you are allowed just to say, hey, my namespace is going to be this, and here is going to be my imports, right? But let's take a look. So this is my interface, this is my contract, and in this case, I'm using generics. And one of the cool things on the generics on C# is like, hey, I'm going to do your entity, and then I'm going to say, give me the type of your ID. So this is a generic way to say, hey, if at some point I'm using whatever entity I need or whatever practically ID type I needed, this is going to be part of the contract that we are setting for my application. And normally we say where the entity is practically a part of the class, right? So that's how we are doing. Now take a look. We are doing the regular crawl, like the create, read, update, and delete. And practically we're using tasks. We're using asynchronous way to do things, right? So no more on the blocking. I mean, we can just do the entity, but of course we need to wait. Right now, I think what we are moving towards is to start using asynchronous mechanisms to do certain kind of a tasks. So in this case, the task will be an asynchronous way to do, in this case, an entity, right? Or on the read, we can do get by ID async and get all async, meaning get all my employees or whatever class we find, and then define asynchronously. And take a look here. I already put in an expression. This expression allows me to have a predicate, meaning that I can start finding on whatever kind of a field I need, right? And we're going to use this very soon. Now the update, the same, it's just an entity task, it's just a delete. And practically some save changes at some point when we needed to do it, right? So this is my repository, this is my class. So this is how I would like to start with this. Remember, this will be my contract, not only for the entity framework, but the future or the next release of this particular project will be ADO.next. And we're gonna of course, reviewing this at that time, right? So that allows me to expand. So now that we have our repository, practically what I like to do here is also have my service, right? So I'm gonna put here my service. You can put it wherever you want. Actually, you can put the service right here on the web. But right now we're gonna add it here on my library, right? So I want to keep that separated. So what I'm gonna do, I'm gonna create, now this is a concrete service because we're gonna talk about employee service, right? So that's why I'm putting this employee service. And of course, I already have everything that I need. So I'm gonna show you what I mean with this, right? So practically we have all this, as you can see, is the employee service. We have our constructor, right? That is practically where we have the dependency of the I repository. And the I repository, we're already saying, hey, it should be an employee and the ID will be a global unique ID. So that allows me, for example, at some point here, the employee service, doesn't matter what implementation you have, while you're respecting this particular contract with this repository, practically you can switch between databases, or you can switch between implementations. Probably you have a JSON database, or maybe you have an XML or something like that. But in this case, we're going to use CockroachDB. We're going to use still keep using this part, right? And as you can see, for example, for doing the create, I have the employee. If not, okay, I can do a new UID, or I can do just a regular new. Remember that we have that set up. And then take a look, we have the repository. Whatever is going to be my implementation, just going to do the the creation. And for that, we're going to do the save changes. The same for the get ID. As you can see, very, very simple. Get all is going to expect an innumerable, practically a collection of employees. The same for find by role. And take a look here on the find async. Practically, I'm doing a role. That is going to be our famous kind of a CockroachDB keyword that we've been using along all these particular episodes, where we can find in a particular time our old data, right? So, or we can go in time and practically say, hey, give me what happened 20 minutes ago. So for me, or for us, we've been doing this using the role. So we're going to do that also with this part, right? Now with the update, as you can see, is the update async, and save the changes and delete is kind of the same. As you can see, very simple on the employee service. Nothing kind of a something that you are familiar with on what you've been doing, maybe with Java, with the Spring Boot, or with Go and GORM, the Go ORM, right? So it's actually kind of the same. Now we're done with the library. Practically, this is done. Now let's implement that with inside the data EF, the entity framework. We're going to implement this particular class. Now, as you can see, probably I didn't do that, but something that we require in this case for the payroll data EF is to actually have a reference to the project. So in this case, this data EF project needs to have a reference to the library. And in order to do that, normally we go to the terminal. We're going to go here on the terminal, and we are going to do this particular command. With this particular command, I'm telling A, use the .NET, add the payroll to the payroll library, right? So, and normally, let me see where we are. Right now, we're on the payroll, yes. So practically, we can actually do that that particular command, right? So it's going to be .NET, add the reference, the payroll library into the EF project, right? So that's what I'm doing. And practically, that is already added as a dependency. Now, of course, we need, in order to actually use the entity framework, we need to add some dependencies. And there are many dependencies, right? And using, for example, this particular IDE, you are allowed to have all the Nugget library. This Nugget library, if you're familiar with Java or Spring Boot, of course, we've been doing with Maven. Maven has their own artifacts, their own repositories where you can have or find or download these artifacts, Maven Central, that kind of stuff. Well, Microsoft, or in this case, these applications, now they have this Nugget publicly. So practically you can find all the packages here and install it from here. But in this case, I'm going to use just the terminal, so you can actually see what are our dependencies that I'm going to do. Of course, I have my cheat sheet here, and these are the dependencies that we are going to use. The first one will be I need to add to the data EF project. I'm going to use the .NET Postgres SQL Entity Framework core, right? Remember that we, as a part of the CockroachDB, is based on the Postgres protocol. So practically, we are doing the SQL statements based on that particular protocol. So that's how it works. This is how normally you are going to add this particular package, and then some tools and design. Normally, these tools are more related for creating migrations. We're not going to do migrations because of the time, but practically these are the tools that we are going to need if you want to start doing migration, meaning that, hey, I'm going to change my schema. Maybe on the employee, you want to add the salary. Practically, you can do the migration, and these particular tools allows you to actually have a versioning schema that allows you to have a sequence on what you're doing with your application, right? So that's what we're doing right now. So as you can see, I'm adding all these particular dependencies that we need. That's it. Also, right away, that now that we are here, we can actually add the dependencies that we needed for the web application, even before I touch that, before I forget. So we can do the dependencies right here. And as you can see, I'm going to say, hey, on the web API, also do the reference on the library and also the EF. Remember, we have the web application, and the web application needs to have practically the reference to the other two guys, right? So that's why we are adding this right away before we forget on this. So practically that's it. We are already set on this. Probably we require also for the web API, in order to work, we're required to add the design as well, because they need to know about the entity framework, right? And I'm going to talk about that and why we're adding this dependency on the web API. Let me just give me 1 second. All right. Even before I go into this, we need to add the particular EF on the project. So now that we have everything set up, let's go back here, and I'm gonna actually rename this. If I remember correctly, it was like the Shift F6 in order to rename. So we're gonna do what we're gonna do right now. It will be to implement our repository, and in order to do that, I'm gonna say employee. I'm gonna do EF repository, right? I hope I spelled it correctly. Very good. So I have this guy, and of course, I don't have the cheat sheet for that, but I'm gonna copy whatever I have over here. I'm gonna explain what's going on over here, right? So first of all, this is my repository, and as you can see, I'm implementing from repository. Now, for this particular repository, I need to have a payroll DB context. I'm gonna tell you this next. But what I wanted for you to know is that this particular DB context is the main core of the entity framework that allows me to actually say, hey, this is my database, this is how you connect, and practically behind the scenes on the entity framework is going to do the relationship between the table, of course, the columns with my particular class that in this case is employee. And as you can see, I'm doing everything, all my contract, like add asynchronously, the get by ID, get all sync, and practically I'm using the entity framework. These will be, if we are doing a kind of an analogy on Spring Boot, normally we already have this in place if you are using JPA. So every time that you do repository, for example, employee repository.save, practically is kind of the same thing. This has behind the scenes everything that is needed to do in order to execute things, right? Now, as you can see, this is just the iRepository. This is my contract. I already implementing this using, in this case, this particular payroll DB context. So let's create this over here. So let's create it. This is, again, this is part of the entity framework. So that's what we are going to do right here. So it's going to be a class. And from this class, this is the only thing that we are going to need now. Let me copy. I didn't have the cheat sheet for that, but let's review it. So for this one, it's actually going to be my payroll DB context. And as you can see, we are extending from a DB context. This is the entity framework that allows me to actually do the magic behind the .NET, right, when doing persistence. So now one of the things that normally you are entitled to do is, the first thing is how's going to be your data set, right? So in this case, is going to be based on an employee, right? If we have more classes, of course, you need to add this. Now, this model protective on model created is not necessary. Practically, you can do everything here. It's just as simple as you know, as you can see. Is if we see the analogy with the Spring Boot, for example, is like when we have an interface that says employee repository extends from the JPA CRUD repository, or the CRUD repository practically is kind of the same thing right here, only by extending this and allowing to do to know to the DB context, you are going to start using a set of employees. Now, this particular on model creating is when you actually need to do something else. Like, for example, right now, my employee, my model is just a plural, right? It's only employee. So in order to actually make it work, and some of the, kind of the practices that probably you want to name your table in plural, right? So practically, that's what I'm doing here, meaning that when you find your entity, practically call it employees. And even I'm doing this particular property, check this out. Of course, in Java or Spring Boot, you don't need to do this, but practically here you need to say, if they don't provide you with an ID, practically you can have a value for a general random UID, and UUID, right? Based on the column name and based on the type. So this part, when I'm doing the model creating, what I is doing is practically behind the scenes is doing this particular mapping. And not only is helping me for the mapping, but also is helping if you're using the entity framework tools, and when you're doing migrations, practically it's going to grab this particular model creation, and it's going to be based on this configuration, is going to create your tables or whatever other things you have there. Like, for example, if you have some kind of a relationships, if you have multiple tables, this particular on model creating, that's what is going to do here, right? So practically it's also helping you to actually create your tables as well when you are using the tools. So that's it. This is pretty much on this. This is my repository. So this is the implementation of that where I'm using this payroll DB context. Practically, we are set on the data entity framework part. All right. So the next thing that we are going to do here, we are going to go into the main program, right? So now that we have the library, remember the library has the employee model, we have the service, and we have our contract. Now on the data, we have our DB context. That means it's part of the entity framework. And we are using that entity framework right here on the implementation of the employee repository. As you can see, very simple, nothing too much on this part. All right, now we go into the program. By default, already this application, it says, hey, I can map. This is going to be your endpoint, and practically I'm going to send you a hello world. Well, we're going to need to do more stuff right here, right? So the first thing I'm going to do is I'm going to remove all. And I'm going to, again, use my cheat sheet here. And we're going to have these particular things. Well, first of all, we have a payroll web API. We have a create. We're telling please register the DB context and use the CockroachDB connection string. And we're going to see where we need to put this connection string. That's the way to say, hey, give me how I'm needed to connect. So we need a particular setting similar to the application.properties on a Spring Boot. That will be the way to do it, right? Now, the other thing is, we need to do some wiring, right? So we need to inject at some point, I need to recognize that this is my repository and this is my service. So in order to do that, normally you do builder services and you add the scope. That's part of the injection that is happening behind the scenes. Now we need to tell, I need to do the controllers. So use these particular controllers, and this is what you need to start building. Then once you have that, create your application and map your controllers. We don't have a map controllers yet because we need to create the employee controllers. The map controllers, what is going to do is going to review your class, your controller, and is going to start finding the attributes that you're sending into your methods. So it's actually doing the mapping of the request, right? So every time that you have a defined endpoint, practically these map controllers is going to do all the routes for you, right? So we need to specify that, and that's the next thing. And even though right now it says, you have some errors, of course, we haven't do some initialization, right? So I'm going to do some initialize again. That the same thing we've been doing. We need to have some employees already, so we can actually start doing something with the data, right? So this is part of my library. So this is how we are going to start with this part. So the next thing we're going to do is I'm going to tell you, like here on the app settings.json, that's where we are going to add our attribute, right? So in order to do this, I have also my cheat sheet here, and practically is the connection string is going to be the CockroachDB. So this name should be the same as this guy right here. So it's CockroachDB. My application settings is say, I'm going to go to the local host. I'm going to go to the port 2625. The database is payroll. The username is root, no password. And right now the SSL should be disabled. So this is the connection. That's it. That's how you connect your entity framework to CockroachDB, of course, using the right drivers. And in this case, we're using the .NET Postgres driver in order to connect to CockroachDB. All right. So the next thing we're going to do is we're going to create the DB initialize, right? So that's the next thing we need to do. So I'm going to create this guy right here. So it's going to be another class. So for this class, we have this, and of course I have everything set. So let's see, let's review it. And as you can see, I have just a regular class DB initialized. And what I'm doing right here is, I'm going to practically see the employees, and I'm passing the provider, right? So it's just going to be a provider. It's kind of the injection that we are looking in these particular programs. Is the same as, I don't know if you remember on Spring Boot, normally you do you create a bean like a add bean, and then you say command line runner, or a program arguments. I don't remember the other, but or events, right? So you can do that, meaning that once your Spring Boot application is up and running, practically you can execute some initialization code. So this is actually this, right? So practically here I'm saying, hey, I'm going to use the DB, and as you can see, is the provider, meaning the payroll DB context. And from there, I'm just adding these, and I'm doing the save changes, right? So that's what I'm doing. I'm just saving. As you can see, it's very, very easy to do because it's just a new list. And this is the way that normally you can do on C#, right? So you're passing already the arguments, the attributes already, because we declare them public. So that's why you have this particular notation that you can do, right? Very, very simple on that. Very good. All right, so we have those things. Now that we have everything here, practically what we need to do is we are all set, right? So we have our program. So this is my program. Again, the program will be registering this connection string. Then we are going to have this particular injection on the repositories we need. So in this case, it's going to be the employee service and employee repository. And of course, we're missing the employee controller, right? So how I'm going to do, yes, I'm going to add the controllers. Where are my controllers? And of course, I need to map my routes. Where can I map those routes? So practically, we are going to also do some tuning here. I have my code over here, and I'm going to do add class. I'm going to say employees controller. I'm going to tell you what this means, actually, why I needed to put that plural. And you're going to see those things, right? So, oops. I think I didn't. I copied wrong, but yes, very good. So now take a look into this. I put already employees controller because one of the key things here when you're using an API, you first of all, these are your attributes, meaning that you are marking these employees with plural, right? Employees controller as API controller, meaning that .NET is going to look for those when we were checking out these things like add controllers. I'm going to kind of research which classes have marked the API controller. It's the same on a Spring Boot. The analogy will be address controller. Then I can do the add request mapping, but here in .NET, you can do this attribute name route. And from route, you say API, and then these particular suffix or prefix actually is controller, meaning that it's going to be based on the name. So practically these will be employees at some point. And if you don't like that, you can actually change it to whatever you want, right here. So practically it will be employees automatically, but the cool thing is I can do like a controller, right? And where the controller is going to grab this particular name. It's a naming convention. Practically your class needs to end with controller. So the first name will be right here. So it's going to be API/employees. Now take a look. I'm on my particular constructor. I'm saying like, I'm going to need my service. And remember, my service is the one who is actually calling the my contract, and that contract has the implementation of using the DB context, right? So we are covered here. Now we have an attribute for doing the get, the post, and take a look that we are doing async. So remember here now we are doing some asynchronous calls. So instead of a blocking for waiting for something, practically you can actually do this kind of a non-blocking with task and async. And take a look, we have an action result that allows me to return okay. There's there are different ways to answer. And for example, here is the okay, and you can pass the object or just the okay. You can have the created, you can have the no content, by request, unauthorized. So there are many responses that you can use right here. Right now we're going into the kind of a happy place, so practically we're doing the okay. Now take a look on the create. It's created at. You have another option to do that, and then automatically once it's saved, automatically it's going to return the object plus the ID that it was given at some point, right? Also the HTTP GET here, like if we're doing by ID. Remember on Spring Boot normally we put the add path variable. Here you see the HTTP GET. You put the what is going to be your variable in the endpoint, and practically that's it. You don't need any extra annotation here, or in this case, any extra attribute. In this case, is HTTP. The HTTP delete the same. And now take a look also for the recent role, something that we've been doing. I was trying to experiment and say, the entity framework is more related for, you have your object relation mapping, and how can I actually extend it? And normally the best solution will be, don't use entity framework, just go to the ADO.NET. You have more control over your queries, over how you access the database and all that kind of stuff. Well, actually with entity framework, yes, you can actually do that. You can actually execute some how you say, like a native queries, right? Like at the same on JPA that we added like a native equals true at the end of the add query annotation. Practically here, the only thing that we need to do is DB employees. We are going directly with the context. We are doing from SQL raw. We're passing the SQL statement, and of course the parameter that we're passing the role, right? So that will be the way to do it. And that's how you access this. This is normally how you execute these from a raw SQL. Here, instead of a native, they call it raw. So practically that's it, right? So we are able to do these kind of things. As you can see, this is the only thing we needed. So the next thing is try this application. So let's see if this actually runs. So in order to run it, of course, we can actually do several things. And the first thing, of course, we need to start our database. So let me see if I can do this. So where am I right now? Okay, I'm on the pre-roll. So I'm going to do let's do the command. The first command is going to be at the cockroach star single node is going to be insecure, right? So right now we're doing the testing, and as you can see, it's already up. Perfect. So we have that. Then what we need to do is just create our database. So in order to do our database, we need to actually, we can actually go and say cockroach SQL insecure, and we have actually access directly to that. So here we can create our payroll database, right? So in order to create our row, let's see if I can see any databases. So the database is default DB, the postgres, and the system that's inside CockroachDB. So we can create the database. I can say list, and as you can see, we have the payroll already. Now, switching to the payroll is just that payroll. So we're now on payroll, and as you can see, there is no tables right now. So we need to create our table. Of course, here Another way to do it is through migrations. So we are not going to do this today. That will be on subsequent podcast. But we're going to create this particular table, employees. So if I do this, now I have my employees. If I do the select star from employees, I shouldn't have anything, right? So as you can see, no rows. So let's see if these run. Let's take a look. So remember, we are, again, just to have this clear, we have 3 projects, the web API that is actually creating the REST application, the library that has my model, my contract on the iRepository, and the service that is actually part of the employee. And then the data EF, the entity framework project, where it's actually I have the DB context that allows me to connect and make the entity framework available to me through my implementation of the repository. That will be how we have this particular project. So let's see if we can run this. Let's see if there's no error. Maybe sometimes it's too much on that. And one thing that I always like to do is just to have my, so I'm going to create a folder here, a directory. I'm going to say HTTP. And inside this HTTP, I'm going to create my file saying employees. I like to use the plugin that comes with Writer or the JetBrains. They have this HTTP client, very cool stuff that allows me to actually start playing around. So I can do, I'm gonna do some cheating here, and let's start, right? So first of all, yeah, I have a variable, that's the port. So if I go again on my service, let's see which port I'm using is 5248. So 52, I'm gonna change it, 5248, right? And then I'm going to say, let's take a look into employees, API employees. So I'm going to play it. And as you can see, hey, I don't have anything yet. Oh, it's missing the, sorry, here is missing the host, the base URL, base URL. Oh. Let's see if that works. Base URL, yes, the same base URL. I'm missing something. Okay, let me see if I can do just directly the local host. It's kind of weird. All right, yeah, there you go. Yeah, I think I'm gonna use the variables right there. Very good. So as you can see, we have the 2. I did Glenn, and then I added myself there. I don't know if you remember, we have these over here on the DB initialize. Just very quickly, remember we have these 2, meaning that when the program actually went here and say, hey, I need to actually create some initialization, I say, hey, I have my app, do initialize and pass the service provider, that in this case is my entity framework. Very good. So again, we have this. There you go. And then we have, of course, we can have a Greg. Let's do Greg. Oh, I forgot to add the local host. Very good. So Greg is there. And of course, if we go here on the employees, yes, Greg is there. But now let's go for the role, right? Remember, we have some engineers there by role. So if I'm doing this and I do this one, let's take a look. Only Glenn. Where is Greg? So that's when we are using this particular as of system time, where we can actually going in time and practically say, hey, tell me what happened actually 30 seconds ago. And the only thing that we have is just Glenn, right? So if I do again, now we should have Greg right there. So yeah, this is it. This is the application, and this is how you connect with .NET and CockroachDB. As you can see, it's very, very simple. Of course, there's different methodologies that you can use. You can use all the UI. Practically, the UI can do everything for you. But I like to do normally on command line most of the time just to understand what is going on and what is happening. And of course, doing drag and drop on IDEs like a Visual Studio or VS Code, that will simplify things. But in this case, I would like, I want to use these kind of scenarios where I can do this kind of manually and at least have the time to explain what is happening. So just to recap on this, very, very simple. Again, as you can see, we have three projects. We created a solution. We added these three projects. The first one, the one that we did first was when we have the employee and my contract on the repository using generics, right? So one is the entity, one is the primary key that we are going to use. Of course, my employee, as simple as possible, setters and getters, just publicly, just UID, the name and the role. Then the service, right? The service that is actually using the that particular repository that we are going to use. That's it. And then the data entity framework, where the first thing, or actually we started with the repository, but the first thing is we need to have the DB context, and this is the key. We need to say, hey, these are going to be my employees. This is going to be my set. So this is my data source kind of a thing. And then the implementation of that repository, right, where we're passing the DB context. And practically, this is the magic happening behind the scenes. The only thing that you need to do is just use it, right? So as you can see, everything that is right here is happening behind the scenes on the entity framework. And of course, the last one was the API. The first thing we reviewed was the program, right? So where we have the connection string telling, hey, if you're going to use your database context, and in this case, the payroll context, the way to connect to CockroachDB is to use this particular string. We already saw that this string is this one, right, where we put the host, the port, the name of the database, the username, the password, and the SSL that is going to be disabled for now. Then what we did was to initialize that particular context, right? So we are adding some new stuff. Again, the analogy will be when we're declaring a configuration of the bean on the Spring Boot and we declare the command line runner, that will be the same thing. And then, of course, the employee controller, where we say, hey, this class is going to be my controller, and this is the route, and these attributes are going to be the ones to respond to those endpoints, right? So that will be how. And finally, is there a way to actually execute native, very particular keywords from CockroachDB? Yes. The only thing that you need to use is this from SQL raw. You pass your SQL and then whatever parameter you are needed right there. So yeah, that's it. Very good. I hope you like this.
That's really cool. That's a lot of fun. It's got to be for .NET developers. I mean, that to me looks like catnip. If you're like, ooh, if you do .NET, then that's the game in town. Actually, up the road for me is Nashville, Tennessee, which is actually a huge .NET community. So I like the idea that with CockroachDB, you can pick up your favorite toolkit. If you're a .NET C# developer, you grab it and run with it. It runs. I mean, CockroachDB speaks Postgres wire protocol, so it's easy to pick it up. We've done Spring Boot in the past. We're doing .NET right here. Um, we're putting it back up here again. Felipe's put his demo app up on GitHub. It's free. Go grab it. Go play around with it, and tinker with it. And it's just a lot of fun. I like seeing the raw SQL queries, or you can do the as of system time queries. We call them follower reads. They're also known as time travel queries. Put that up there briefly, but so that's really a neat feature, and then it's easy to wire it in. Now, don't forget, if you're having fun watching the show here, be sure to hit the subscribe button and ring the bell. And if you want to take a spin at Cockroach University, well, if you want to get your hands on CockroachDB and play with it a little bit, there's an online forum where we've already got some pre-baked tracks you can go through, and it's a lot of fun there. Go to university.cockroachlabs.com. If you're listening through the podcast, I'll have to put up a banner for that. But we're also releasing. We're going to cut this episode and put it out on the podcast network, but there's a QR code here if you're watching it visually. You can scan it. And Cockroach University, right now, what the content that's up there is free. So be sure to take advantage of that. Is there anything else we need to cover here, Felipe?
No, I think, guys, there's a kind of a commitment for the next time we talk about .NET. We can do the ADO.NET. That's a different perspective. It's like if we do the analogy, I always need to have this comparison, right, between technologies. But the ADO.NET, it will be more like standard Java JDBC, right? Not even the JDBC template, but it's going to be raw SQL, raw stuff that we need to do. So it's more stuff, right? So that's why this is the easiest part.
Options and opportunities. So you can just back in, you can pick up CockroachDB, the database you just can't kill, and you run it in a multi-region configuration and back it into your favorite toolkit. All right, everybody, thanks, and we will see you next.
This episode is over, but your learning has just begun. Visit CockroachLabs.com to find all kinds of content to expand your knowledge.